Okay. Ooh.
We good?
Yeah.
All right.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Good? Okay.
Going live. 3.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our second Kingdom Conversation. We are so glad you're here. For those of you who are joining us online, please let us know you're here by commenting. We have our wonderful friend Corey, who is managing the comments on Facebook and on YouTube. And so we hope that you will engage with us that way. We're really glad that you're here. It's our second one, so we're still figuring out exactly how this goes.
Yeah, we don't know what we're doing.
But for those of you who I don't know, my name is Peppa. I'm the founding pastor of Kingdom Community. I guess you could say I'm to blame for all of this. It's weird to introduce myself so formally. And this is my friend Brad, all the way down here.
Hey, everybody.
He is my co-host for Kingdom Conversations. And tonight's episode is a little different. Tonight's episode, we are actually going to be talking about me and Brad and about Kingdom and how it came to be and why we even have these conversations. And when we thought about who would be a good person to interview us, we came up with Stephen. Stephen is a trusted friend of Brad and mine, and we are grateful that he has said yes to interviewing us. So tonight, you will get to learn more about me, you'll get to learn more about Brad, and you'll get to learn more about why we are gathering and having these conversations each month. So with that, if y'all are ready, I'm going to turn it over to Stephen.
Okay.
Are we ready?
I think I'm ready.
We're ready.
I'm ready. Okay.
Are y'all ready? We're ready.
All right. Well, thank you for that introduction. That's right. As Peppa said, I'm Stephen Causey. I'm the guest host today. Really, I'm just the interviewer. And I'm really excited to be here. And thank you both for trusting me to come out and interview you. So my goal today is to ask you both some questions and to help our listeners learn as much as possible about you, our hosts, Brad and Peppa, and Kingdom Community, what it is, and probably most important, why you should be listening, what Kingdom, or what it means to them and why it's so important. So with that, I'm going to start with a really simple question and just ask how you two met each other.
You want to answer or you want me to answer?
So for me, I was at I think it was like a celebration dinner at my sister and brother-in-law's house. And we were at the dinner table, and my brother-in-law and I, like we tend to do, we got into some sort of, sarcastic or cynical, philosophical conversation, just kind of cutting up. And Pastor Stacy happened to be there at the table, and she heard us, and she kind of chimed in, and she was like, hey, you know what? My friend Peppa is starting this group, and she definitely knew how to sell it to the two of us anyway, because she said, first, it's going to take place at a brewery, which she probably just could have stopped there because I'm in. and she said it's going to be, conversations of philosophical, theological nature. So, we were sold, and I had no idea at the time that I was about to make, a profound new friendship with Peppa.
Thanks. That's so nice. Brad has a habit of saying really nice things.
Sorry.
And I'm grateful because it's a helpful reminder sometimes. For those of you who don't know, and I should have said this at the top, we are actually located in the worship space of Melissa United Methodist. So Pastor Stacy that Brad is talking about is the pastor here, and Melissa United Methodist is one of our ministry partners, and we're really grateful that they let us use this space. So as I remember it, meeting Brad, we were at Tups. Down the street in McKinney. This was pre-COVID, and it was one of those nights where I didn't know who was coming or if anybody would come, and we found ourselves in this side room at Tups, which I didn't even know existed, and I actually don't think it's there anymore because they renovated and stuff.
I know.
But we were in this conference room, and all of a sudden I'm in a room with 20 other people, and Brad happened to be there, and we got to talking. And Brad consistently, as the numbers would wane and wax, Brad was always there. And so Brad and I have struck up a friendship, and I'm grateful.
I just needed somebody to listen to me, so.
Yeah, there you go. Happy to do it.
Peppa was the only person that would tolerate me, so here we are.
Here we are.
You've grown your listenership too. What are we up to right now? All right. So,
4.
and if you're just tuning in, we're interviewing our regular hosts. I'm your temporary host today, and I want to remind you one more time. Also, if you've got any questions, please post them in YouTube or on Facebook, and we'll get to those in the second half of the show. So, Peppa, could you tell us what exactly is Kingdom?
So Kingdom Community, it's a great question and one that I actually get asked a lot because for those of you who I don't know, I'm an ordained Presbyterian pastor, and generally in our system, you are the pastor of a church, or you might be a chaplain, or you might have another validated ministry with an organization. There are not a lot of pastors in this area who say, well, I'm starting something new. And so Kingdom Community is a multi-denominational new worshiping community. So that's like the super technical, super churchy way to say that. But what sets it apart is that it is fully affirming, and we don't have a building. So we are a community. I am very intentional about that language because I recognize and we recognize that the church has not always been good to everyone. And for a lot of people, church is a place of great harm and great pain. And so when Kingdom Community came to be, I was really intentional about calling it a community instead of a church. So we are fully affirming. We are based in the value of building relationships. So the word kingdom was actually coined by a theologian named Ada Maria Asasi Diaz. And she coined that word by taking the word kingdom with a G, and she took the G out and created this new word with the idea of having a full relationship of all of God's beloveds. And when I heard that word, I love it because it's like a not so subtle slap to the patriarchy, sorry, men on the stage, but it actually opens the doors up for all people, no matter what you believe, where you come from, who you are, what you've done. It is a word that encompasses all people. And for me, that was paramount in doing this work and starting Kingdom Community. So our mission statement, and I'm going to read it directly because we actually went through a process with professionals who are smarter than me, and we got to create a mission and vision statement, and the language is really beautiful and really intentional. So I'm going to read it so that you all can hear it to the truest form. So Kingdom Community is a community that is modeling and imagining what is possible when all people are seen, heard, and nurtured, when all people are invited and encouraged to bring their whole selves, where questions are celebrated as much as answers, and where inclusion, integration, and love are the norm. So that's what Kingdom Community is and strives to be. We're trying to imagine a new way and a new possibility for being in relationship with one another.
I think that's a great answer. I love that. And I love that you focus on the word community instead of just church, because that really sets you apart and it says what you're trying to be. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your story, how you found your journey to find Kingdom and your vision for it.
So I grew up in the Bay Area of California, and I grew up at a Presbyterian church that was artistic and open-minded, and the iterations of church that I experienced happened in worship or in doing plays and theater productions and singing and moving and dancing. And so for me, church became this holistic embodiment of faith instead of just people telling you what you should believe. Like, I got to learn what I wanted to believe. And I grew up in a church that was affirming. And while I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and I don't think anybody ever explicitly said, well, we are open to all people of all walks of life, it was modeled in the nature of the people that I was raised with. And so inclusion and open-mindedness and this willingness to understand that the faith journey I'm on, or any kind of journey that I'm on, is good for me, and that other people have other journeys using different language and different words. And so my job was not, I was always taught that it was not my job to make people walk the same path as me, but it was my job to learn how to walk with other people. And so when I grew up and felt called into ministry and moved to Texas, things were very different. I learned a whole lot about Jesus and the church in Texas that looked very different than what I had grown up with in the redwoods of the Northern California area. And so I learned in Texas what it was like to have exclusion be, and not necessarily in churches that I worked with, but just in kind of the culture here. I don't think it's a surprise that we're in the Bible Belt. And so I learned quickly that exclusion and this idea of salvation and who's out and who's in, all of those complicated things, and I had to reconcile within myself what that actually meant for me as a person of faith and me who was entering into a life of ministry. And I got my first ordained call, served a small church, which is actually where I met my wife. And I was ordained, and then I came out, and all of a sudden, a church that I had been madly and deeply in love with my whole life, where I had never experienced rejection, isolation, being cast out, or being anything less than accepted, all of a sudden I was now part of a community that was on the fringes. And not always, and sometimes not even on the fringes, that was just unacceptable, right? And I really had to wrestle with the call to ministry that I had and the call to be married to my wife, which I hold equally as important, and sometimes actually fall further on the side to be called to marriage than I do called to ministry. And when I got asked by the powers that be, well, what do you see as next for your career? What's next? I looked at them and I said, I don't know, because I think I'm called to start something that doesn't exist yet. And they kind of looked at me like, oh, here we go. But I had just spent so much time growing up in this beautiful, loving, inclusive environment, and then done my adult growing and my adult understanding of faith and work and professionalism and church, and the two were not quite matching. And as I looked at the landscape of North Texas, I saw a need for affirming space, a need for open space, community building space. And luckily, the powers that be, I caught them at like the best possible moment, because when I asked them to trust me with this and to help get behind me and to give me resources to do this, they said yes, which is like a shocker, like because this area is not necessarily known for like risky new things. And so for them to say yes came at just the right moment, because in all honesty, I was at the point where I was ready to walk away from ministry. And I think if they had said no and asked me to go back in traditional church, I would probably be doing something else. So Kingdom Community really is a passion. It's a call. It's something that I just believe in with my whole heart. And I'm lucky, because as hard as it is to start something new, this is the kind of work that energizes me over and over and over again. So that's how we got here. That's how I got here, through a lot of work and a lot of like long nights and probably some stressful nights. I'm looking back at my wife who's in the room, who's been along for the ride of getting this going. So yeah.
Wow, that's a tough road. So tell me your vision going forward for it. What do you hope it to turn into?
So the vision initially was like this small group gathering, like what we had at TAP at TUPS, right? Mm-hmm. So we had started TAP at TUPS, and then that kind of fell by the wayside. And when Kingdom started, we were starting with some of the same like players and some of the same characters, right? And hoping to create some of the same energy. And then the pandemic hit, right? And so we had to shift. And what is really exciting is that in that time where I think a lot of people were concerned about, well, how are we going to go back to the way things were? The door was kind of thrown open for Kingdom to actually grow and to shift and to change. And so my vision, and I think the board's vision, like what the leadership would hope, is that this would be something that is life-giving to a community of people. The exciting part about this too is that we're hybrid. So I'm one of the first pastors that I know that's actually pastoring or like walking with, however we want to talk about it, a community of people that I may never actually meet, which is really exciting. So I'm hopeful that this will grow. My vision for this is really that it is edifying and bridge building and hope giving to people in the world.
Bridge building.
Bridge building.
I love that, and even as an outsider, I feel that there really is a need there. So I'm so glad that you've discovered that and had the courage to fill it.
Thanks.
So, with that said, the two of you met, but there were others that were getting together too and talking as well. So, what was it that led you to choose Brad as your podcast mate here?
Yeah, let's talk about your poor decision making.
Well, it is, it's an interesting thing to be in this work, right? And I think a lot of people tend to look at me and go, I'm so glad you're doing this, with the understanding that they would never have any interest in doing it themselves, because it's a lot. But when I met Brad and we started talking, so in all honesty, Brad, you're the first person I think I've ever met who falls on the different side of things in terms of faith than I do. And yet knows probably more about things related to religion than I do. Brad's really, really smart. And Brad, you have a passion for this, and you are, somewhere along the line, I fooled him into trusting me, and so here we are. And when it came time to like think about what was next for Kingdom and started Kingdom Conversations, I was pretty clear that me sitting in a room and talking for 45 minutes would be super boring and not enjoyable to anybody. And so I was like, well, maybe we'll do interviews. And then I was like, okay, but me doing interviews by myself will also get boring really fast. And I was like, let's ask Brad. I was like, he loves to talk to people as much as I do, and he's passionate about this. And so I took Brad to lunch, and he said yes. So yeah, I chose Brad, or I was led to ask Brad, because there are not a lot of people in the world who are passionate about relationships and about getting to know people in real and honest ways, and Brad is one of those people.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. As a friend of Brad's, I'd say that's very true. So, Brad, it's your turn. Tell us a little bit about your journey and your religious background as well.
Okay. Well, I grew up in a fairly religious home. My mother and father, my sister and I were committed believers. We were all active in the church community, and we went to regular Sunday service and Sunday school, Bible study, youth group, vacation Bible study, mission trips. And all of our extended family was all committed believers. In fact, I can still remember when we would go out of town and visit grandparents. Those were weekends that we would miss church, and so on Sunday mornings we would all wake up, and I still remember doing Sunday morning devotionals at the kitchen table with my grandparents. So it was very, very active, very faith-centered life. But at some point, I ended up kind of stumbling upon something that had inspired me to ask questions that I didn't even know could or even should be asked. And that really kind of started me on kind of a what I would call a truth-seeking journey. That eventually, it ended up changing my mind. And so that started probably about 10 years ago, or maybe just over 10 years ago, is when I kind of started that truth-seeking journey. And to be honest, I probably walked away from faith about as soon as that journey started, because I started to learn things that troubled me. And it's just been a really strange feeling that I still haven't quite gotten over, just how different reality seems now versus the way I saw the world when I was younger. sometimes it kind of feels like I'm still watching the same play that everybody else is watching, but like I'm watching it from backstage, like behind the curtain where everything is happening. I feel like that's the best way I could kind of put a metaphor to the way I feel about it most days. But to be more specific, to be very specific, I don't believe in a God any longer. And to state that another way, I've spent the last decade scouring every informative resource out there, seeking anything that might be considered to be evidence of a divine creator. And in my humble and probably unpopular opinion, as of yet, none of that has seemed very compelling. In fact, the usual things that are given as evidence, they've really only served to cast more doubt in my own mind and raise even more questions. And saying all of this right now publicly, there's going to be many of my friends and family and acquaintances that might be learning this about me for the very first time. And for anybody that falls into that category, I would tell you that there's very good reason for that. I think that humans are helplessly tribal people. We're incredibly talented at finding reasons to dislike and to distrust one another. And so I don't know how many other people are out there that have had this experience, but especially now with the social media age, you meet somebody in real life and you strike up this really great friendship, and this person just seems like funny and altruistic and intelligent and kind, and so you kind of pursue the friendship further, and eventually you make friends with them online, and then you quickly get to meet their online persona, and you're Corey
We've
knows.
all been there. Yeah.
And your jaw drops and you go, who is this person? This is like, I don't know this person. I thought I knew them, and apparently I don't know them. And so, I mean, it's almost always going to be something political. There's so much information out there. It's just overload, and so there's so many opinions that people can have. And I think a lot of us make the fatal mistake of wearing our opinions like some kind of uniform that has been grafted onto our body. It's like there's no longer any way to separate people from their opinions. They have become their opinions, and we're all probably guilty of that. So when somebody has an opinion that differs from ours, it can elicit these really strong feelings of just offense and disgust. And of all of the opinions that people can form, I have noticed that people's opinions about their views on God and spirituality and faith, those are typically held about as highly as you can hold an opinion, or as deeply. And so by the very simple act of not sharing someone's views on God or faith or spirituality, it means that I have the ability to elicit these profound feelings of anger and rejection toward me, just by doing nothing else than just holding a different opinion. So this is why I don't talk about my lack of faith or my lack of belief in a God outside of a very, very small handful of people, each of whom have let me know before I've even said anything that it was okay to talk about that. Peppa will probably find some familiarity with this, but I can tell you from firsthand experience, after years of secretly keeping company with a really large community of non-believers and hearing other people's stories and their testimony, being a non-believer in the Bible Belt of America can only end in loss. Being faithless around here means losing lifelong friendships. It means being quietly judged and shunned by acquaintances It can mean losing your job and losing opportunities for employment elsewhere. It can mean being ridiculed and ostracized by the community that you've always called home. It definitely precludes you from any chance at running for a local office or a community chair. It can even mean divorce from the partner that you've dedicated your life to, and it can even mean losing family members as near and dear to you as your parents or your children. So all that being said, that's my religious background, and probably the most nervous I've ever been.
Thank you. Y'all, I want to take a moment and just say thank you. What you just said was really brave, and was in a sense your own coming out story, right? You're still married to your wife and very happily so, but it's a coming out of a different sort. And so for you to share that and for you to trust us with that, thank you.
Thanks.
I appreciate it.
Brad, what does that mean to be accepted into a community like this, with that being known that you come from a secular background?
To be accepted by the community? I mean, that
To be brought into Kingdom and be such a big part of it.
I think that means a lot to me, because being embraced by believers is not, I don't think that's typical, at least not around here. So I think it means a great deal that there are people willing to set aside their different viewpoints and accept and embrace somebody that does not share those same viewpoints. That's a big deal.
And I imagine it says a lot about your community as well.
Yeah, I think if I've learned anything in being part of both affirming and inclusive faith communities and now part of the LGBTQ community, and finding myself in circles where the stories are different and the experience of being wounded or cast out is similar and shared. Brad, to your point, almost all of the things that you listed as coming out as a person who does not believe, I can almost guarantee you that people in the LGBTQ community have experienced most, if not all, of those same things when it comes to loss. And so for us, I would hope that Kingdom would be a place that would accept and would welcome, because we all know what it's like to find ourselves displaced. So.
All right, well, thanks. Thank you, Brad. So let me kind of gear back to your interest. So given that you have this secular background and that there is an element of faith to Kingdom, what is it why do you want to be a part of it?
Well, I think that it probably has a little or a lot to do with, I think church history. There's some uncomfortable context there. And I wouldn't want to be unkind, but I would like to state it, honestly and thoroughly. I think whether people are aware of it or not, churches collectively, some more so than others, are in a very perilous decline right now. And I don't necessarily mean that people's faith is in decline, because I don't think there's a correlation there. It's just churches are in decline. Because with each new generation, the collective culture kind of gets a little more mindful, a little more self-aware of the world and their place in it, and we end up casting off some of our old beliefs and our habits and our tradition, if they ever get to the point where they seem irrelevant or unproductive or harmful for many of us. And unfortunately, I think for a lot of people, church is beginning to fall into that harmful category. I think that the original intention behind setting up a church was so that it would produce, these two fruits, which were faith and then fostering a relationship with Christ. But I also think that pretty early on, those two main goals took a back seat to things like blind conviction and dogmatism and hostile exclusivity, which is kind of something you were referring to. It goes back as far as Council of Nicaea and the Roman bishops kind of democratically deciding that Christ was divine, because there were many people, and maybe the average churchgoer might not know this, but the early Christians, as that was all happening, there were people that had many different opinions on Christ and the relationship to God. So,
See my previous point about Brad being really smart.
so many of those people, like after there was an orthodoxy that was formed, a lot of those people were persecuted and eliminated. Over time, you see different denominations and treatises and quarrels, and so the Bible ends up slowly shrinking as books are removed and now considered apocryphal and heretical. So now you further narrow the circle of inclusion, and more people are considered heretics. And then, of course, you've got, the whole bloody problem with the Crusades. Of course, that's a little two-sided.
Not a good look. It's not a good look.
But, there's millions of people that died there. And then you've got Martin Luther inciting the Reformation with the 95 Theses and proclaiming that people no longer needed the church to be their mediator between them and God. And so that begins the whole Reformation. And I don't know if that's necessarily an exclusivity kind of a thing, but there's a huge split. And so now you've got these two factions that don't like each other. And then there's the Inquisition and the Dark Ages, and you've got seeking out heretics and non-believers and pagans, and there's torture and murder there. And then there's the long ongoing war with science, with people like Giordano Bruno and Copernicus and Galileo, and not having some popular opinions about the very observable universe. And then there's also this pattern that just kind of lingers throughout church history, and there's a tradition of people colonizing places that didn't ask to be colonized, and villages are decimated, and people are killed, and slaves are taken, and people are converted, at sword point. And you kind of get into the more modern era where citizens all over the globe start rejecting slavery, and then churches are now put in the awkward position of, should we keep condoning slavery, or should we say that that's no longer a good thing? And then in the post-slavery world, you've got the struggle with churches needing to decide whether they now need to accept these free people of color. After that, they go through the messy business of deciding, should women be considered faith leaders alongside men? We just don't know. It's a really tough question. And
The church sounds so awesome right now.
and then you've got everything happening in the 80s with the moral majority, and they start kind of trampling the lines of the church and state boundary. And then in the 90s, you've got megachurches popping up everywhere, and there's major hypocrisy issues going on there, and the prosperity gospel. And also in the 90s, you've got this astonishing slap in the face to many people who are already marginalized when they come up with the concept of gay conversion therapy. And you fast forward to today, and secular society has long since recognized that gay and trans people are the equal and legitimate human beings that they've always been, and there's still, right now, too many churches that still need to be dragged kicking and screaming across yet another societal milestone. Just last week, an independent commission in France wrapped up a 3-year investigation, just in France alone, that went from 1950 to modern day, and they estimated that as many as 330,000 children were likely sexually abused by church leaders and staff between 1950 and today. And that huge number, again, only applies in just France. So all of this unpleasant summary, that completely ignores just day-to-day self-righteous attitudes, over-dramatic piety, and relentless condescension that a lot of church leaders and churchgoers have become known for. And to be fair, not all of them are guilty of this. There are plenty of church leaders who have been on the right side of history when and even before change was demanded. But it's for all of these reasons and many more that countless people, even faithful believers still included, now harbor a great deal of resentment toward churches. And I also, well, not all churches are responsible for this history and in some cases the ongoing damage. But it's hard to ignore the fact that even more progressive churches are still obligated to bear the burden that has been created by the reckless. And so the damage has been done, and many church-averse people may still want a relationship with God, just maybe they no longer care to find it in a church. Some of them might be taking a break. Others might be resolved to never go back at all, and plenty others may see this as a good sign to leave faith behind altogether. So I should probably address the obvious conflict of interest in that I'm currently saying all these very uncharitable things while I'm seated comfortably inside the Melissa United Methodist Church, which is led,
It's awkward.
which is led graciously by Pastor Stacy Piakin. And I'm seated next to another pastor, my friend Pepa Paniagua. But I would like to point out that Stacy and Pepa are the absolute antithesis of all of this uncomfortable and distasteful church history. Had either of them been church leaders through any of these messy and problematic transitions, you would have found them in the small but vocal minority, viciously fighting for all of those necessary changes to take place and doing it for all of the right reasons. So I really respect both of you, and both of you are heroes and role models in my book. I appreciate you both.
Thanks.
But back to the question, which was, why am I attracted to all of this that I just said? Why here after all of that? So I found this really great quote from this obscure Middle Eastern philosopher, and I can't think of his name right now, but y'all can Google it later and probably find it. Anyway, he had this famous saying, and it goes, "Whatsoever you do unto the least of your brothers and sisters, you do so unto me." Can you imagine how different church history would have been if something like that were in the Bible?
Spoiler alert, it's in the Bible.
Pepa and Kingdom, I think, seek to heal the damage and to create a community and care for the least of these who have been hurt and excluded and marginalized by churches for so long. So, and whether or not participants choose to believe in a higher power, this is all still a cause that I can get behind.
So after all that,
Thanks.
we're sticking with the word community.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, just make
Here's the deal. So I'll just and this is completely off script. We're going a little detour real fast. I just want to be really clear that in every step of this, Brad has really wonderfully and kindly asked me, what are the boundaries? What can I say? What can I not say? And the truth of it is, those of us who are believers and those of us who are maybe even faith leaders, if we can't sit and hear the uncomfortable truth of what has been done in the name of the God that we believe in, then we probably don't have business in being in church anyway. And so I have told Brad and Stephen, and I would tell anybody, to me, my boundaries are be kind, be honest, and pay others the respect that you would hope that they would pay you. And so anybody who's listening who's oh man, Brad just roasted the church. He stated the truth. And so I just want to I'm not trying to tidy it, but I do want to say none of what he just said was surprising or unfriendly.
Yeah. I think on some level, a lot of people know these things, but I think when you put it in
Listing them all
chronological
together
order,
is making
you go,
me yeah, I'm not questioning my life choices. It's okay. So yeah, we're sticking with community, firm and hard community.
All right, fair enough. And so how does your secular perspective influence your approach to this project?
even though churches are in a decline, it doesn't mean that they are going away. And I think as a non-believer, maybe you might think that, well, I don't really have an incentive to care. Maybe I should just feel like, oh, good riddance. And maybe some of my non-believing community friends would say that I shouldn't care. But right now, there's an understated battle for survival that's going on between two different types of churches. I think one side interprets Scripture with an intent to exclude and to condemn as many as possible, while the other side is just humbly trying to live by the example that Jesus set for people in all of those red letter passages. And personally, I actually like the characterization of Jesus. I think his story is very appealing. So if somebody's asking me, well, which version of church do I want to help support, and which version of church would I like to see left when all the dust is settled? I mean, that's no question. I'm going to throw all of my support behind the church that is trying to live more like Jesus. I'm probably not going to find my way back to any version of theism in my life, but if I can be a charitable and humble partner that can maybe in some small way help to guide theism toward a more productive and peaceful relationship with secular society, then I'll happily give all of my time to that endeavor.
Oh, that's great. Awesome. Okay. I'm going to take it back to asking both of you questions.
Okay.
And you've kind of already answered this a little bit, but I want to focus on it. What really separates Kingdom Community from other communities of faith and from other churches and communities of non-faith? What is it that really sets you guys apart?
Go first.
You want me to go? You want to go first, or you want me to go first?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, so not to beat a dead horse, but in these parts, the fact that we're led by a queer female pastor and an atheist for these conversations,
That's one thing.
I don't think there's a lot of things happening like that on a Sunday morning. I could be wrong, and if I am, cool. I think that we are dedicated to being open. There are a lot of churches in this area and in the world that are committed to giving people answers and that deal in black and white binary. I'm not that kind of pastor, and I hope that this will not be that kind of community. So I think a willingness to embrace the wisdom of other people, other traditions, other belief systems, it's something that I hold sacred. I think that we are willing to take some risks that a lot of churches, to be fair, can't, because of the things that they are beholden to by the nature of being a traditional brick and mortar church. There's a lot more flexibility and a lot more agility that we have as a community that others don't have. And so I think there's a lot more flex then too in how we approach all of this. I also think we're different because we don't meet on a Sunday morning and we actually want to be in relationship with the people that we are working with. So that's why we are committed to having a really great hybrid in-person and virtual experience. We want to know people. We want to hear what they're going through. We want to hold them in community with one another. I don't know. That's my stab at that question. Brad?
Mine's pretty much going to mirror yours. So I have this tendency to over-romanticize these long dead traditions from ancient history, even though I'm fully aware that the ancient world was just very futile and brutal, and it was a difficult life. But for a handful of very privileged people, there were some things that happened back then that I kind of wish still took place. And one of those that I think about a lot is this tradition that they used to have where philosophers and theologians and thought leaders of the day, they would all just gather and talk about things. Not really talking at each other, but they would just ask questions, and they were free to speculate, and they could challenge each other. Maybe there was a little debate there, but it was just this very curious and open, and my impression is that it was just a humble environment. And so I think one of the problems with modern day church is it's more prescriptive and sort of, I want to say dictatorial, like, as in that you show up, you listen to a sermon, and then you go out into the world with this new directive on, how to live life or how to handle certain situations. And I feel like it would have been a lot more constructive from the very beginning if churches had maintained that curious, humble community and attitude of just asking questions and discussing things with each other openly and honestly, and having it less about one person leading a congregation and rather having a congregation all collectively trying to come up with ideas, and maybe they collectively come up with these directions. And so, I definitely romanticize about that, because I don't think there's a lot of that happening. In the places where people are discussing things, it's usually like heated debates, and people are angry, and so anyway, just people getting together and asking questions and pushing each other out of their comfort bubbles. To me, that's a big deal. And we can all still disagree at the end of the day, but somewhere in that process, if everybody is kind of learning a little bit and growing a little bit and opening themselves up to just a different perspective, that's something that I get really excited about. I find a lot of value in that, and that's something that I've seen from the very beginning with Peppa, and I believe that's what you're trying to do with Kingdom.
Yep, all that.
All that. So why, this is probably one of the most important questions, why should people tune in and listen to this?
You want me to go? I'll go.
I think it's important to be to be open and accepting of all people from all lifestyles and backgrounds. I think that the conversation series that we're doing here is particularly interesting because we don't want to just hear different perspectives from this binary of like belief and non-belief. I think in the long run, we hope to open it up to other people like, experts, theologians and scholars and historians, anybody that can provide a unique perspective when we ask, some really big questions. And like you've already mentioned, there's not a lot of places where you're going to find a believer and a non-believer, holding community together and asking each other questions and exploring things in a very friendly way. But I have a suspicion that there is a great hunger out there from a lot of people for discussions like this, and so I'm really excited to be a part of that.
So I was actually just telling Brad earlier, I'm listening to Rob Bell's book, Everything is Spiritual. And he said, I literally almost pulled over while driving today to write this down. But he says in that book that we are all connected and that our vision for community should be something where we can be in relationship in such a way that when I look at you long enough, I see me. And when you look at me long enough, you see yourself. And I think in a world where there's so much division and where we are so hell-bent on labeling and creating division based on categories and who loves who and who voted how and who believes what and what color is their skin or how does their hair look or do they have hair, the things, right? There's so many things that the world tells us, well, these should be dividing factors.
The other.
Yeah, the other, right? And I hope that these conversations will be reminders and models for how to look at the world and look at other people, trying to see ourselves in their story and trying to learn new things rather than for the ways that we're different. We are all unique and we all have different stories and different experiences, But I think what we have the chance to do here is to create a sense of commonality, even across some things that people would never expect us to find commonality in, right? So I hope that we will be able to see ourselves in the stories and the conversations that we have here.
Yeah.
One of the things that I hope people get out of it, and one of the reasons I hope people will tune in, I think we keyed in on these journeys that you're both on, that we're all on, and I think so many of us don't view ourselves as being on a journey, but we view ourselves as being a certain person with a certain view. And once you do that, we dig in our heels and we lock down, and we're not really looking to change. We're not really interested in change. We're not really learning and growing anymore. And so what I see you guys doing here is it seems like you're both very different in certain ways, and you're bringing in people to interview that are very different, and that shows people that it's important to be getting these new opinions and hopefully learning and growing from that. And so that would be my answer, not that anyone asked me.
It's correct.
Okay, thank you. I do think that was a good answer. No. All right. So what are your desired outcomes of these conversations? We kind of answered that already, but
Yeah. I would say a larger sense of community and a larger sense of belonging. I think healing, like to get kind of technical, like I hope that people who will tune in or who will be part of the Life of Kingdom community will find that they don't have to segregate parts or compartmentalize parts of their identity, that their whole selves are welcome and accepted and valued and celebrated, and actually we would love to know all of you. And the value, like, of what you just said, like, I would hope that people would come knowing that their stories, as mundane and boring as they might think they are valuable and worth hearing and sharing.
For me, I think there's kind of an overarching desire to positively represent non-believers in front of a crowd that, we hope would be a significant portion that's believers. And so I'm here to let believers know that non-believers like myself are like you in virtually every single way. I want believers to see Peppa and I in conversation and know that a warm and kind, compassionate friendship can exist, regardless of having a major difference of opinion on God. And I also want them to know that it's possible that they too could have several faithless friends or family members around them at any given moment. And should the day ever come that any of those people muster up enough courage to confide that in you, I want people to think of Peppa and I, and maybe they'll be a little bit better prepared to know how to react or how to communicate in a way that doesn't ruin their relationship with that person and drive them further into isolation, because I'm telling you, there are a lot of isolated non-believers out there that just live in perpetual fear of other people finding out. And on the other hand, I want all of my non-believing community members living with so much church-inflicted scar tissue to know that not all God-seeking believers are militant, sanctimonious, and self-righteous, and exclusionary.
Thank you.
Because there is quite a bit of that out there, as we've already covered. And I want Peppa to be seen by them. And I want them to know that she is one of countless others that would be just as accepting of them as any of their non-believing community members are right now. And what's more, I want them to see that despite disagreeing on the concept of God, there are so many Christians out there in the world who, in many ways, actually share your very humanistic and progressive worldviews. I think for far too long, we've all lived with these sort of cartoon character opponents in our heads, as if having one specific opinion on anything means that you're obligated to have all these other opinions. And I think we prejudge people a lot when we do that. And that's not really how most people are. we're all full of opinions and probably full of surprises. Both sides have lived that attitude of distrust for way too long, and I just want everybody to know that you don't have to live that way. We're all the same. We need the same basic things, and we don't have to pose a threat to one another. We don't have to live in fear of one another. We can be friends, good friends, and have a community together despite having a difference of opinion. So that's my overarching goal.
I know it's hard to come out and admit to something, a deeply held belief like that, especially publicly like this. But you know, Brad, that's how you build bridges, right? I mean, you talked about how important that is, and people know you, and they know you're an outstanding guy, and that's yeah, sort of like sometimes, and that's how you do it. I mean, I truly believe that.
Thanks.
It doesn't make it easy, but I think that's true. So I've got a couple more questions before I jump into my next one. If we have anyone who's watching or listening right now that wasn't here at the very beginning, be sure and post any questions that you might have on Facebook or YouTube, and we're going to get to those pretty quickly. Do we have time for a few more questions before we get there?
I think we could take questions if you want. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm good with that if you
All
want.
right.
I'm good with that.
Okay. Well, in that case,
Corey.
All right, we have one question for Brad. Could you speak a bit more about the difference between the issues with institutional church and the issue with belief in God?
I feel like the church institution, well, maybe you could speak more to what the institution of the church is, but I think you can separate your belief in God from your attendance inside a church. A church is just a building where other people congregate, and they kind of have that mutual belief in God. But you don't have to have a church family or a church home to believe in God. I think there's a lot of people out there that pursue a relationship with Christ and seek a stronger connection with God outside of a church. Maybe they haven't been to church in years. I don't think that's necessary at all.
All right, I have another question. This is from me. So far we've heard from two different views. Are you guys looking to bring in people from other religious backgrounds for conversations?
Yes, absolutely.
1,000%. Yeah, I think Brad and I, part of the reason that I'm excited about doing this together is that Brad and I both love to learn. And we love to learn about other people and other backgrounds and other faiths. I think that the world is so rich with lived experience that, I want to hear it all. I think you feel the same way. So yes, definitely. If you know beautiful, lovely people, please, and this goes to anybody. So Corey, anybody, if there are voices that you know and that you cherish who you think would be great people for us to talk to, please submit those names either in the chat or you can email me directly. It's pepa@kingdomcommunity.org. Yeah, great question.
All right, next question. So we learned a lot last conversation, how to support LGBTQ community. So how can we support our baby atheists, the people that come to us and share this? What would you have liked to heard or experienced?
If I were being found by a community like this?
Or in relationship, like if you were talking to your family, or say if we're a Christian or another faith belief and somebody says that, I have a different view, I'm an atheist, how can we support you in those conversations? What can Christians or other believers do better for you?
I don't know if I could offer any advice on what to say. I can give you a lot of advice on what not to say.
That's helpful.
Which is that's probably going to be even more important, because you don't have to say anything. If I could recommend saying anything, it would just be, especially if it's somebody like close friends, family, just say, I love you and I still accept you. And you don't have to get into, some people's initial reaction is that they immediately want to jump in and fight. They want to debate you. They want to talk you out of the position that you've now found yourself in. And that is the worst thing that you can do. Should the two of you get to a point where you would like to have like a very calm conversation, and maybe a believer wants to hear more about why somebody has walked away from faith, maybe you both give each other some time to kind of cool off, and maybe you just kind of collect your thoughts and try to go into it with, well, it's hard to say don't go into it with emotion, because it's, for a lot of people, that's going to be a very emotional conversation. I just can't emphasize enough being accepting and loving, and just to stay as far away from rejection as you can if you want to continue to have a relationship with somebody like that's trying to confide that in you.
Great wisdom. Thank you for sharing that. And you're getting a lot of love on this feed. So thank you for sharing yourself with us.
Thanks.
The next question is from Connections Coffee. They serve great coffee. Check them out. So they want to know, could Peppa please tell us a bit of multi-denominational? Who is that? What does that mean?
Great question. So multi-denominational, this is where I actually get to tell a little bit of a redemptive story about church, which is exciting. So Kingdom is partnered. I'm Presbyterian PCUSA, so Presbyterian Church United States of America, which, if we're talking about factions and break-offs and things, the PCUSA is pro-women, pro-LGBTQ, pro-people of color. There are other Presbyterian churches out there that are not that way, so if you have questions about that, feel free, message us. We'll help guide you. But being an ordained Presbyterian pastor, and it's funny because Stacy will say that I am deeply in love with the church, so much so that even in moments where I've really come close to wanting to break up, I just can't quit the Presbyterian church. I love it. It's part of who I am, and it's a huge part of what raised me. But I also have really valuable relationships and friends in the Methodist Church and in the Lutheran Church. And so when we started the work of Kingdom Community, one of the ways that we wanted to set ourselves apart was by being multi-denominational. So we have ministry partners in the PCUSA, the United Methodist Church at a local level, and then the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. So we are supported by the Lutherans locally, regionally, and denominationally. So we have multiple church partners who are saying yes to this work and to this endeavor, because I think, in all honesty, if we were to sit down and ask any of the folks who are in leadership and have the power to say yes or no to stuff like this, they would probably say, yeah, the church has gotten it wrong a lot, and the church has really done some damage. And so if this is a way that we can try to take steps towards doing better, then we're committed to that, and we want to be part of that. So I'm actually really grateful for the churches and the denominations that have said yes and are partnering with us to make this possible. So I'm proud, point for church.
Good job, church.
point for church.
All right, we have another question. This one is for you, Brad. Are there any sort of religious type beliefs that you relate to? And are there any teachings of Christ or lessons in the Bible that resonate with you at all?
You mentioned Rob Bell earlier, and my friend Joseph turned me on to him. Thank you, Joseph, if you're watching. You're reading the book.
I'm reading the book, Everything is Spiritual.
Everything is Spiritual. So he also gives a video presentation on that, but there's something that stuck with me that he said. He was describing Jesus in these very non-traditional terms, and what he liked about Jesus, and he was like, Jesus was probably the original Rage Against the Machine. And I thought that was hilarious, but really, just what he represented in the time that he allegedly lived, he was a very radical person, and I can actually get fully on board with his story. I could appreciate that in many ways. Other than that, if we're talking just spiritual teaching or religious scriptures that I've seen that I appreciated. I don't know that anything necessarily stands out. I think there was something I saw the other day. It was talking about spirituality, and I think it was one of the definition that I've liked most was spirituality was acknowledging that you are part of something greater. And that's something that I think believers and non-believers should feel comfortable accepting, because whether you want to put that in a metaphysical sense and say that you're a part of something bigger, see also God, or if you want to look at it from the naturalist perspective and say, you're part of something bigger, and that is the whole of humanity or the earth or the universe. Those things are true as well. So I like that definition of spirituality. I think that that's something that everybody could embrace.
Cool. Okay, that's all our questions from online. Are there any questions in the room? Any additional questions in the room? No? Sweet. Okay, cool. Do you want to wrap up with our last couple of questions?
Sure, yeah. I think the next question I had was, how do we reach people that aren't tuning in already?
Tell your people, tell your friends.
Yeah.
People that wouldn't necessarily
people that
seek this.
wouldn't.
They wouldn't seek this out.
That's a good question. So to Brad's point earlier, where he hopes that he can lift up like a positive representation of both believers and unbelievers, I would hope that people might give this a chance and be pleasantly surprised, or not. But I think I would hope to meet people where they are. I think one of the tricky things about church, right, is we are all consumed with ultimately, butts and seats, metrics, all of the things. And I'm not so much concerned with that as I am with a desire to want to be at table with people. This work is the kind of thing that I think can get confused pretty easily, and it's going to be messy. That's the beauty of this, is it's going to be messy, and there are going to be moments where we have hard conversations. I hope that really, if there are people who wouldn't necessarily want to tune in, or that aren't necessarily thinking this is something where they could find themselves, that they will hear through word of mouth that this is a place where we are trying to do things differently. I don't know. And I kind of want to be like, well, what do you two think? Because I don't think either of you would have anticipated 6 months ago finding yourselves here. And yet, here we are. Sorry, that's like a, whoop, whoop, here you go.
To me?
Yeah, sure.
How could people fight? I would like to think that maybe just this whole concept of believer, non-believer, holding a friendly discussion and trying to learn and grow together. I would like to think that other people would be interested in that just in general. I guess I just have a hope that maybe it kind of grows and becomes something that people can find organically without it needing to be shared by a friend. But certainly having our friends and family, sharing this and letting other people know what we're trying to do, that's certainly going to help. Speaking of, if you haven't gone to the YouTube channel and subscribed, that's a really important thing to do right now.
Yeah, so he's not kidding, because if we get to the magic number of 100 subscribers on our YouTube channel, we can actually customize the YouTube URL, which right now is a lot of letters and numbers. So if we could have it be youtube.com/Kingdom Community, that would be great. But we can't do that until we hit 100. So go team, go. And I almost want to be for our 100th, whoever is our 100th subscriber, I'll buy you a cup of coffee at Connections. Ping.
It's too bad I've already
So
subscribed.
we need 100 subscribers or one person to subscribe 100 times.
Can
Is
you
that- how does it
subscribe
work?
100 times? I don't think so. But please, that would be abundantly helpful to us, is to go and subscribe to the Kingdom Community YouTube page.
Yeah.
I'll take a shot at that too. I think a big way is just by building up trust in your own communities, which I think both of you have done. And then when you have these types of conversations, people that might not typically want or care to tune in are more likely to want to do it because they know and they trust you and they think that what you've got to say has always been valuable to them. So I think that's at least gets it kicked off, but you're right, eventually you're going to want some sort of organic growth.
Sure.
In the long term, how would humanists and people of various faiths, of all kinds of faiths, live together in some kind of spiritual community or non-spiritual community?
I think if people could just in general, I just carry themselves with a little more humility and a little less certainty, and just be open to other people's perspectives instead of shutting them down. I mean, I think when you do that, you end up shutting out so many people that you might otherwise have really great conversations with. And that feels like that's kind of the spirit of what Kingdom is. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I would say that I would hope that people, regardless of affiliation of belief or unbelief, that people in general could find a way to value relationships over being right or over opinions. Like, I think what I would hope for this community is that we would be a community that is seeking to be in relationship rather than seeking to prove a point.
Yeah. Because I think back on all of the conversations that we've had. You've never once said, oh, well, hey, did you consider this? And like, you've never tried to, try to nudge me out of my, and you just you sat and you've listened to my story and you listen to these bizarre, stupid facts that I bring to you from wherever it is that I get them. and I listen to your stories, and I've listened to you talk about the people who have influenced you, and yet we've never tried to, I don't know, to change each other. We're just here to listen and to be friends.
I'm laughing at a stupid joke in my head about something along the lines of like the gay agenda and the Christian agenda, and I've never enforced either of them on you. Like, I'm like, I love you as you are. So, like, some could say, right? Yeah, but I think that's part of it, is meeting each other where we are, and I hope that we can model that with the conversations that we have with the people that we have conversations with down the line.
Agreed.
So.
There's one thing I hope we can pass on to the youngest generation now. It's to just hope to learn something from everyone that they encounter and not to be so certain about everything. I think that's a major problem that we have right now. Everybody's so certain about everything. My last question is really more of a get to know you kind of question. This is going to sound way off track, but a little backstory.
We trust you.
I texted Brad the other day, and hope you don't mind me saying I was at Disneyland last week.
I don't mind you
And
saying
I
it
was
all. I'm
at
jealous.
Star Wars World, which is amazing. I'm a big Star Wars geek. And I texted Brad. I was like, hey, you're a fan, right? And he goes, well, kind of. He goes, I like it. I don't totally geek out about it or anything. I think those aren't his words, those are mine. And so I thought, well, what do you geek out about? And I'd love to know from both of you, what is it that, when you're not doing Kingdom, what do you geek out about?
Gosh.
Either one of you.
Man, music, things that are designed well.
Things that are designed well. Would you care to elaborate
That's pretty
just
broad,
a bit
right?
on that?
Broad.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just see cool objects or inventions or cars or houses or just anything that you could tell somebody put a lot of time and effort into planning it and not making it just function well, but it also looks great. That's pretty cool. I like science, tech, philosophy.
The list is long.
Yeah.
All broad subjects, too.
Right.
That's okay.
What do I geek out about? I was like, my wife will answer for me. Books is one, yes. I love a good book. What? Did you just say nails? Color Street. Oh, yeah. Okay. I mean, fine. I geek out about churchy things, like when there's like an opportunity to do something different and cool. I get really geeky about that. I also geek out about coffee and really good food. Like, I'm the type of person, like, if you go to somewhere, if I've been there, I'm not the person that's like, go see this historical place or go look at this amazing thing. I'm like, you want to eat here, here, and here and get coffee here. That's how I travel. That's how I do things. So that's what I geek out about. And also, I'm with Brad. I hate to tell you this. I'm not, and this is going to, John, if you're watching, I'm really sorry. That's my biological dad. He is a big Star Wars, Star Trek person, and I just, it's not my jam. It's not my, I love the people who love it. But I support them in that, but I
only recently finished the final 3. And I had to I had to really
Steven's
plan
like,
out
"No."
when I was going to watch them because my wife's not a big fan. She calls it space movie.
Ooh.
I feel supported
Okay.
but alone.
She's not a fan, but I needed to know how it ended.
Okay.
Yeah,
But we love you and we support you, and we're glad you're here.
yeah.
Well, with that, it has been a pleasure being here, and I'm going to pass the buck back over to you,
Okay.
Peppa.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for saying yes. Thanks, Brad, for opening yourself up and for sharing things like you. Yeah. I'm really proud of you. You were super brave tonight. So thank you for sharing that and for trusting us. Thank you to our team of folks who are in the room making tonight possible, and to our child care workers and our coffee baristas. Thank you to all of our partners. We will be back next month on the 3rd Tuesday, so we will be back on, thank God that slide's there, November 16th. And actually, we can tell you what's happening next month, and the tables are turning. So next month, Brad and I are actually going to be interviewing Stephen to hear Stephen's story and to share a bit of Stephen's story with you all. So we hope that you will tune in either in person here at Melissa United Methodist or online at 7 o'clock on Tuesday, November 16th. And if you are led in the meantime, please feel free to check out the Kingdom Community website, which is kingdomcommunity.org, and look at the ways that you can invest your time and your resources to help make Kingdom Community possible. We are in a stage of growth, which is exciting, but it also means that we need more than just the people you see right here. So we would love to partner with you and to find ways to get you plugged in to make Kingdom Community sustainable. So have a great night. Any other closing thoughts before I wrap?
No, prepare yourself.
We're going to ask lots of questions about Star Wars now. Just kidding, just kidding. Okay, y'all have a great night, and we will see you next month. Thanks again.
Thanks,
You're
everybody.
loved.